İyi akşamlar. İyi akşamlar. Good evening. We are very happy. We are very happy to host this panel in connection with the exhibition through the lens of the Dildilian Brothers. We have distinguished speakers and the moderator this evening. So I just wanted to express deep gratitude that they came here all the way in order to address to us this evening. So we have Sergisi who came from Yeniden to moderate the panel. We have Ailesinin, who came all the way from Canada in order to participate.
Louder.
And then we have Ailesinin. She also came from the other side. She's teaching at the Asia. She's teaching at Sivas University. Last but not the least, we have Professor Merzifon, who is the grandson of Solak Dildilian and who actually created this exhibition. So I wish you a good debate.
Solak Dildilian would say thank you to Osman Kavala and Anadolu Kültür, I am sure. So we will say it for them. Thank you for many things, especially for Anadolu Kültür's finding the most accessible ways for us to remember our past and share it with each other. Arif says, welcome, hoş geldiniz. This discussion is going to be in English, and at the end there will be time for questions. You feel free to ask questions in any language that's comfortable. We'll do something with it. We're going to we don't have the lives that were lost, and those lives won't come back. The way of life, not just the individual lives. What we have at best are memories of those lives. And even that's very difficult to hang on to because it's so abstract and so fragmented. And I've been thinking recently that one of the things that we each try to do, wherever we live in the world, is to try to find ways to come back here in order to try to find those memories. We each try to find a way to reconnect. Fethiye Çetin found a way. She initiated the renovation of water fountains in her grandmother's village. And that was her way of reconnecting. People like me find every journalist, every public official they can find, and drag them to places that matter and try to explain things. That's my way of trying to reconnect. And it seems to me that the Dildilian, Marsubian, Derharutunian family has found their way to reconnect. And this is it. And we're very fortunate that they're sharing this with us. I'm going to start with Armen. We'll talk with Ailesinin, we'll talk with Ayşegül. Again, about memory. Armen, these are your family's memories. You could have shared them anywhere, done anything with them, or not, ignored them. I'm sure the process wasn't easy. But you're here, and they're your memories, but they're kind of mine too. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes, that's especially okay, because we as a family have shared many of these memories together for many, many years, because a lot of these photographs were part of our family traditions of annual reunions. And the family also shared many of the stories over a long period of time. But I felt, and I believe my uncles who owned the collection of photographs, because they were photographers themselves, wanted to share this history with a much larger audience. They began a process of documentation and collection and identification and writing of these stories more than 30 years ago, and they were not able to get very far in that process. When I was given the materials back in the late 80s and early in 1990, I felt, as I say in the introduction to the booklet for the exhibition, that I had made a promise, unspoken promise, but still the promise, to bear witness to what had happened to them, their experiences, good or bad, good and bad, and to bring that to a large audience. I also realized that that bearing witness, and that's the title of the exhibition, is Bearing Witness to a Lost History of an Armenian Family. Bearing witness has a moral function, and as a philosopher, I'm a philosopher. I teach ethics and moral philosophy, among other things. So bearing witness has a moral function, and it's important because it has a moral function. It's not just an obligation within a family. It's an obligation to the community, the greater community. It serves a double function, I would argue. It serves a memorializing function. So in a way, this exhibition, I perceive it as a way of memorializing what happened to our family here in the lands of Turkey. But it also, bearing witness, has a role of testimony. Testimony in the sense of seeking the truth. And I believe that function is important for Turkey. And that's why I think it was very important, getting back to your question, why this exhibition needs to take place here.
In fact, that's the question I also want to ask Ayşegül Altinay. We have a philosopher, we have an anthropologist, and we also have an actress who's also a political scientist. So we have quite a variety of approaches to what could otherwise simply be seen as just a very human and emotional experience. Ayşegül, these photos are here and they're being shared here to a great extent because of your mediation. I mean, you're serendipitous being there, but they're here, and they're our memories and they're your memories. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and following up on Armen's point on moral obligation, responsibility, and its connection to memory. Yesterday, as I was going through the exhibit, two photographs particularly struck me. One photograph is this family photograph that you see right here, and another one is a photograph of orphans upstairs. This photograph, when I looked at it first, we were going around the exhibit with Armen, I thought, could this be the photograph that we used on the cover of our book, Torunlar, Grandchildren with Fethiye Çetin, because it looked terribly similar, and I felt the need to check, because the little girl in the middle of the photograph had been highlighted by the graphic designer of Metis Publishers to highlight our attention to the grandchildren of the survivors, the Islamite survivors of of 1915. It wasn't the Dildilian family, but it could well have been. And I have learned tremendously from this photographic journey that Armen has enabled us, has brought to us here in Istanbul. And I was reminded, looking at the photos of particularly the children, I was thinking of both the grandchildren that we interviewed with Fethiye Çetin, and I was also reminded of my memories as a child, growing up in eastern Turkey on the mountains of Çüngüş, near Diyarbakır, and traveling to Diyarbakır, going through Çüngüş, Çermik, Ergani, and especially when we came to Çermik, the driver who was from that region, who was also a family friend, would often remark the terraces up on the mountains and say, these are the terraces that were built by the Armenians. They grew wine here and grapes. But they're falling apart because nobody's taking care of the terraces on the mountains. So I would be looking at the terraces and saying, what a pity. Of course, I had no idea what had happened to the Armenians. I just knew that they were there and they had built these beautiful terraces that were falling apart. A few years later, when I was 9 years old, we this time decided to stop by Çermik and go around, and a young man was taking us around, and he stopped, so he was showing us the different places of Çermik that were important to him, and at some point he stopped and said, and this is the well that they threw the Armenians into. As a 9-year-old, you can imagine how shocked I was to be told that there was a well in which Armenians were thrown into. So I remember that feeling of shock, but I don't remember what transpired afterwards. Did I ask my parents why Armenians were thrown into the well, what had happened to them, and so on? I don't remember any of that. Several years into a strongly nationalist education here in Istanbul at a boarding school, and I have one of my high school classmates here, I had totally forgotten about both the past presence of Armenians in Çüngüş, Çermik, the beloved land of my childhood, as well as their destruction. And these memories would literally rain down on me as I was reading the last few pages of Fethiye Çetin's book, My Grandmother, in late 2004, soon after it came out. Those of you who have read the book will remember that Çermik is where she was taken away from her mother, the little Heranush, Fethiye Çetin's grandmother, who later became Seher. She was first adopted by an officer in Çermik and then spent the rest of her life in Maden, where she had witnessed her grandmother first kill her 2 grandchildren and then drown herself in the river. And we would go through Maden to the Hazar Lake to swim as a child. So reading about Maden and Çermik, this time from the memories of Heranush, as narrated by Fethiye Çetin, I was drawn back to my own childhood years. This was in late 2004. That year, my book had come out, The Myth of the Military Nation, Militarism, Gender and Education in Turkey. It's a historical ethnography of the myth of the military nation, how we came to understand ourselves as a military nation. And I have to say that the Armenian genocide remains an embarrassing footnote in that book. I only mention it in passing as in a footnote, referring to Taner Akçam's books and some others that I have read, and say, you know, there's a debate about whether these events constitute genocide or not, and then I move on. Did I feel that I was not qualified to write about the Armenian genocide when I was writing this book, which was a critical intervention into the debates on militarism? Or was it too difficult? I don't know. But it certainly was also an outcome of a statement that we've all learned through the years in Turkey. This is a historical issue, it should be left to the historians. And I wasn't a historian, and hence, you know, who was I to say anything about the events of 1915? So my memories as a childhood did not even matter. They didn't constitute an archive. They didn't constitute anything of significance. It was only in 2005 when the Critical Ottoman Armenians Conference was organized that I took this up as a responsibility as an academic, but it was my own participation in these debates would only be possible with the new works of cultural memory that had come out. Reading my grandmother, for me, was a turning point. And then Takuy Tomasyan's amazing cookbook memoir, Sofranız Şen Olsun, May Your Table Be Jolly, which my mother had bought for me as a cookbook. And we have been cooking the wonderful recipes that Takuy shares in that book, but we've also shed quite a few tears and shared quite a few laughs reading the wonderful stories that she shares and the very painful stories that she shares in that book. And the third book and exhibit that drew my attention as an anthropologist was Osman Köker's postcard exhibit. You can see his book downstairs, which showed to me and to many others that Armenians did not only live in eastern Turkey close to the war zone with Russia, but all over Anatolia, including Merzifon, including Izmit, and so on. So it was thanks to these new works of cultural memory that I found a space as an anthropologist to start thinking critically about my own responsibility and my own the possibilities of my own intervention and contribution to this debate. And I think this exhibit contributes to this amazing body of memory work that we have come to share in the past few years, that basically tell us we don't need to go to the archives to know what happened or to learn about what happened and what the impacts of what happened were in 1915. We can ask our grandmothers, look at photographs and postcards, and in fact take the conversations on our dinner tables seriously.
On the one hand, we're sitting here having this conversation, very personal. And on the other hand, I know very well that there are people watching us now. Heradesil.com is doing a live broadcast. CivilNet AM is doing a live broadcast. And I know there are people watching us now thinking, why are you doing this in Istanbul? Why isn't this being done, I don't know, somewhere else? Why is it being done here? And I think that for Arsine and Armen and I sitting here, the answer is obvious, but I'm not sure it's obvious out there. Arsine, why are we doing this here?
I think because of the embarrassing historical footnote. I'm going to read something that I just, out of sheer coincidence today, walking with my friend Chidem in the streets of Istanbul, going from one place to the other, we came across a art gallery, a visual art gallery, and of course this is part of my fascination. I love the field, and I said, Chidem, can we stop for a second? It looks like this is an interesting art gallery. Let me have a look what's going on. And I walked in there. There was an exhibit I cannot pronounce in Turkish because I don't know how to read Turkish, but the name of the artist is Emin Mete Erdoğan. It seems like a lot of people are called Erdoğan in this country. A lot of important people are called Erdoğan in this country. And I'm going to read you something that is completely proposed from a scientific perspective of this artist who has been exploring scientific works in Switzerland, plants, but in the scientific plant, plants as in not factories, science research centers. So this is what it is as an explanation of the artist's work, but I have to read it to you because it just completely resonated about the matter of the footnote. Generally, quantum physics and entanglement theory provides the basis for the artist's works. According to entanglement theory, two electrons formed at the same time are entangled to each other. That is to say, if one of these particles is to be sent to northern pole and the other to southern pole, or even to any place in solar system, when we have an effect on one, the other will react. The theory regarding the electrons being the same and a single one, while appearing to be two different particles, gives the artist a comprehensive vision. I'm sure you can read this in Turkish somewhere, but I don't know which paragraph, but I'll leave it at that. Because I want to come back also to another coincidence, again, as someone who has invested most of my work around history, memory, what you referred to as the bearing witness as a moral function. I did all that the best way I knew, which was in the creative realm, in the work of creating art, in the realm of creating films or theater. I was watching an Ibsen production, The Ghosts, in Paris, just 10 days ago. A production that I knew, a play that I knew, but I had never thought about it as other than what I remembered of it. But when I came out of the production, suddenly it occurred to me, maybe because I was coming to Istanbul, that the deeds of the fathers travel into the lives of their descendants and the younger generation, and they inevitably appear in the conscience of the younger generations. And I thought for the first time, this is very interesting. I'm not coming to Istanbul. This is my second time only in Istanbul in 9 months. It turns out, in a 55-year lifespan, it appeared to me that I'm not here to come to convince anyone of this memory. The faces are also, I think, if Armen would allow me, would be the faces of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, my grandmother, grandfather. If I had photographs, if I had ways of replacing these images, it occurred to me, therefore, that I'm coming here for the first time to say to all of my encounters in Turkey that this is the time where we have to ask the same one question. What has been our shared history that has gone to the northern pole and to the southern pole, and that inevitably we are in 2013 being attracted here to come back here, and still stubbornly, with the pain that we both carry, and the pain that we carry is very different from each other, but equally important, because if we don't deal with the pain, we will never heal. My pain is the pain of my ancestors who come from this land, and therefore this is also my land, because it's the land of my ancestors. And your pain is the one of the generations who have now to carry a history that you don't have the right to know, it seems, at least for a long time you didn't. And now that you do, you have to carry it in your conscience. So for me, it has to happen here. It has to happen now, because it can happen now. And this is the time where we're going to continue another stage of our understanding of who we are. Because as human beings, we cannot exist if we don't have a fair understanding of our memory.
This business of trying to understand memory is so hard. Arsine said what I was thinking when I was looking at these pictures yesterday. Armen, I don't think I have even one picture from this period. Yet the process of trying to remember is, I don't know if it's easier for me or for you. You have 600, and I don't think I have one. Does it matter? Are memories different as a result?
That's a difficult question, but I can address the issue of why it puts a special burden, I think, on myself, is that
there are so many Armenians I know, and I've known over the years, who are in your situation. And that's why having a certain privilege, and I think I have a privilege of having not only 600, I say 600, I'm not sure, I think it probably is a lot more, photographs and negatives and other material, and also all the written accounts, first-hand accounts of what our family went through during that period. I think having that privilege puts an obligation on me to share it. And by sharing it, I think I can, in a way, and I know it's imperfect, attempt to put back together the fragmentation that many Armenians feel as a result of the losses that happened in 1915. Because this is your history, and if I can do anything to help you put those pieces back together, and you can never fully put it back together, I'm not saying you can, I think that's part of the personal motivation I had to share this with more than just our family, because this is the history of every diasporan Armenian. True, there's the difference in this, and from most Armenians, is that we managed to find ways of surviving on these lands at the worst possible times of 1915 to 1918. And that even puts a greater obligation, because we have the story of what happened here in those years, and even more importantly, the years after 1918, which is another sort of hole in memory that I realized that as an Armenian I didn't know. I mean, growing up, I knew about 1915 and what happened between 1915 and 19. And I sort of I thought, well, all Armenians were gone by 1918. That was not the case. There were many Armenians who were here, who attempted to rebuild their lives and reintegrate, and that story needed to be told, and that was cut off too.
Tell the story of the irony of the fact that we have the photographs because they were photographers and they were saved. That is, to me, of the greatest irony.
It is an irony because of the families that were allowed to stay in Merzifon in the summer of 1915, it was only certain individuals who had crafts or professions that were crucial to the well-being of the city. And in my grandfather's case, the government and the military needed a photographer. So it was a practical decision. They allowed him to convert to Islam and to take a Turkish identity and stay. But the irony you're pointing out is that by staying as a photographer, he is a witness in a way that a non-photographer might not have been a witness. I can't say that they are not a witness, but that's the irony, I think, of our family situation.
Arsen, I'm going to ask you and Ayşegül the same question, but you live in two different worlds, so I suspect the answers will be different. The existence of this, does that make your job in recreating these stories, which is what you've done 100 different ways, does it make it easier, or does it, at the end of the day, not really matter because it's what's in your head? And Ayşegül, your job, anthropology, recreating, does the existence of this, other than it feels good, does it really matter in your professional task of trying to put this on the map?
I don't know if I'm thinking in terms of easier or not, but I have to say that after all these years of living the identity of an Armenian, being educated and brought up with the history and the identity of that Armenian, having had the opportunity to hear only stories, because I exactly like you, Salpi, I don't have any photographs of my grandfather Aristakes, whose last name is not even his last name because he was too young to remember his last name. So they gave him the name in the orphanage in Lebanon. They gave him the name of his father's more or less approximate profession, and he was called Goshgaryan, which means shoemaker. From my father's side, they were older, but they were completely the sole survivors, and I only over the years could hear, fragments of stories of deportation mostly, nothing about who they were before 1915. Then over the years, in my own pursuit, interest, we did the work, Atomegoyan and myself, around Ararat specifically. I'm referring to that only because perhaps you do know about that film, as it resonated in a particular way in Turkey. So we did the academic research, all the anthropological research to go back and see what we can find. But it was only last winter, or last fall, I should say, that we were in New York for a conference where I happened to meet Armen at dinner afterwards. And at a very normal sort of dinner conversation, Armen mentioned that he was coming to Istanbul, and there was a project, and he started very simply explain to me what the project was. And then it turned out, thanks to present-day technology, but I guess you have inherited that in terms of your family history, carrying images or devices that make images. He started showing some of these images on his iPhone. And I have to say that I was absolutely amazed at the sheer number of the photographs that he had in possession of his family, but also that this family has had the ability, given all the odds, to generation, changing countries, lands, and continents, to be able to transport this history, this witnessing of the history in such a precise way. It was incomprehensible to me because until I met Armen, for me, the way to find history was to go all over the world in any possible existing books, in any possible existing memories with people, but they were always only tiny fragments that I had to put together, or we had to put together as a community to understand how this history happened. And for the first time, I was meeting an Armenian who was telling me, look, I do have a comprehensive, kind of methodically now organized and, chronologically significant, memory, tangible memory. It just made me. It's not that it made suddenly things easier. This is Canada calling probably. I'm sorry about this. I forgot to turn it off. But it's not that it made things easier for me, but it made things even more real, that ultimately, whatever we are seeing here and what I have been hearing or imagining in my own mind as artists, we were trying to recreate, that actually there were very coherent stories being told over these years. So I can say that the significance of this exhibit here and the significance of what the Dildilian family has been able to do as survivors to continue for our collective memory, and I mean our as Armenians, but our as Turks as well. What you are seeing today is bringing a huge, giant step forward, as closer to what belongs to our fragmented memory.
For me, these photographs both point to our inability to appreciate the sophisticatedness and depth of both shared life in different parts of this land, as well as what happened in 1915 and afterwards. As Arman said, the stories that we get to hear often present a single line. It's as if, you know, people went through the same process and everything was the same in different parts of Anatolia at that time. I mean, these photographs first, I think, make us curious about the specificity of local experiences and the specificity of personal experiences, specific families and personal experiences. I think what Arman has created with his family archive here, family album here, constitutes a kind of alternative archive or counter-archive to the existing historical national archives that we have. It certainly makes, for instance, makes us question the myth that, you know, we were living happily as good neighbors before 1915. In Merzifon, relations between different communities do not seem to be all that neighborly and all that good. So that's something to definitely look into. It presents a very, I mean, the story of forced migration is very central to this exhibit, to the story of Arman's family and of other Armenian families and their stories of processes of survival in Merzifon. When we talk about Islamization in Turkish, we can use, it's possible to use two terms, Müslümanlaşma or Müslümanlaştırma. Müslümanlaşma would refer to voluntary Islamization and Müslümanlaştırma would refer to forced Islamization. And when we use the term Müslümanlaştırma, forced Islamization, some people suggest that maybe it's not good to use this term, that maybe there were people who voluntarily Islamized. That might well be the case, but especially during 19. The story of the 307 people who were forcefully Islamized and what happened to them afterwards, I think should force us to question our own categories. And one thing that we were particularly struck when we were doing the research on Islamization, Islamized Armenians with Fethiye Çetin, was the diversity in the experience of each and every one of the grandchildren who shared the stories of their grandmothers and their grandfathers. Here, the stories of Islamization are quite unique because, as especially in the case of the Dildilian family, the whole family was able to survive through Islamization. That's quite rare. But what happens when that's possible? And what happens when that's not possible? What happens when, as in the case of some of the family members in Arman's family, have experienced when children or especially women become members of Muslim families and then have children and grandchildren, some of whom are us in this room, basically. So, I mean, those are a set of questions that I was reminded when I was going through the exhibit. I think it also constitutes, as Arman pointed out, a kind of counter-archive to the story of death, pointing us to both the specificities of survival, the great diversity in the stories of survival, and to life and survival itself from the perspective of this particular family. So I think it adds great depth to our understanding of what may have happened and makes us curious about what may have happened to hundreds of thousands of people across this land. And it also makes us curious about the witnesses to this process. The soldiers, the other students, the Muslims who are also a part of these photographs, the neighbors, so to speak. How did they experience this process, and how are their grandchildren now remembering, and what are we doing with these memories and post-memories?
It occurs to me that these photos are valuable for a whole other segment of society as well. You know, when we talk about the deportations, genocide, the consequences, we usually think, I think, in two categories. Either in the political construct, that a state made a decision to deal with a political problem, or we talk in the personal construct. My grandmother never knew her parents because, and off the stories go. We don't think about that middle level, and that is, aside from the people who were lost, what else was lost? What is it that we lost? Where was it? How was it? What color was it? Was it fish? Was it fowl? What else was there? We don't know. And clearly these pictures help us. These pictures, the Orlando Calumeno's pictures that Osman Köker so faithfully catalogs and publishes, all of that. But there are now these, according to Maureen Freely, perhaps 2 million individuals in Turkey who are slowly discovering their Armenian roots. Now, never mind the number. It could be 2 million, it could be 1 million, it doesn't matter. The point is, that's a whole lot of people who are now suddenly discovering that they are somebody other than they thought, who they thought they were. I would imagine this is, in some ways, spiritual comfort for that segment whose lives are, I've had 50-odd years to deal with my ups and downs. You know, I mean, this is a whole segment that's overnight having to deal with the trauma. I think you've brought them some comfort.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that from you. It wasn't something I was thinking of when I was first putting this together. But as I discovered in the last few years through works that you've cited, the presence of the remaining presence in the DNA of many Turks today, the presence of Armenians here, I realized that they had, in a way, nothing to re-image what may have been the landscape of their great-grandparents. So in a way, I'm pleased that there is this archive now made available for those who are exploring their past. I believe for them the process is a lot more difficult than it was for me, because not only are they left with very little in terms of the visual landscape, in terms of what's out there in Anatolia, much of what was Armenian culture was erased. The churches, the schools, all the particular Armenian traces are in ruins. So there isn't that for them to connect to. So it's unlike myself, who had this history, and it was always available to me, not to the extent that you see here. It would have been too much as a child, but still, to think that for those who are trying to come to terms with their past here and their Armenian roots, this is great, because they're facing not only the erasure that's here, but also the reluctance of many in their family and friends to accept that past that they're connected to. I don't know if any others want to.
If you want
to comment.
I think in some cases it is true that this is a very recent discovery. For instance, one of the stories in our book in Grandchildren is, in fact, was at that time a 21-year-old young man from Merzifon, and he had recently read My Grandmother and was very curious about the story, having no idea that this was also part of his own family story, until his mother saw the book and said, "Aha, I had given that book as a present to your grandmother." And then slowly and slowly, at age 21, he discovered that his grandmother, his beloved grandmother, was the daughter of an Islamized Armenian survivor. And since then, life has not been the same for him. And when we interviewed him, it was only a couple of months after this discovery, and he kept saying, I'm so excited, it was anxiety, and excitement at the same time. And he had also enabled his own family members to come together and talk about this heritage for the first time. He grew up as an ultra-nationalist. His grandfather was an ultra-nationalist, and he could not have imagined that he had an Armenian grandmother. But what was in his story, what was as striking was the story of the brother of the grandmother, who had not told his wife that he had an Armenian mother when they got married. 20 years later, when he approached his wife and said, "I have something to tell you. I haven't been able to tell you this for a long time, I mean, for the past 20 years, but now I feel that I have to." My mother was Armenian, or is Armenian, and her response was, "So is mine." And they were both from the Merzifon area. So in some cases, it does come with surprising and painful discovery after a shared life. The difficulty of sharing this information only to find out that your partner has the same so-called secret. But for us, when doing this research, something else was very striking, and that was not the silence in the international scholarship and in the Armenian diaspora on Islamized Armenians. We knew that part of the silence in Turkey was due to the difficulty of talking about 1915 and its legacies, and we somehow thought that when we started doing our research, we would come across with literature on Islamized Armenians in the international scholarship, or at least in memoirs, and that wasn't the case. So I think a question that we're faced with also, reading the stories of the Dildilian family and other families from Merzifon is why this long silence on Islamized Armenians in all historiographies, Turkish, Kurdish, Armenian, and international. We, with Fethiye Çetin and Yektan Türk Yılmaz, when we discussed some of the possible reasons for this silence, we identified at least 3 possible reasons. One could be the difficulty of, the ethnicist understanding of the nation that is shared in all of these historiographies. It's very difficult to think of Turkishness that also includes Armenianness, and it's very difficult to think of Armenianness through Armenians who have become Muslim and have led Muslim lives, married with Muslims, had children, and so on and so forth. Another possible reason could be the hegemony of the politics of genocide recognition or genocide denial, wherever, whichever side you stand on. In the literature on the Armenian genocide, Islamized Armenians are often treated as part of the dead, as part of the eradicated Armenian nation, lost forever. And that brings out the question of who is a survivor in a genocide. If we define genocide as the destruction of a group, a cultural, national, ethnic group, these people have not survived as Armenians, but they have survived. What does it mean for us to treat them as part of the dead and not be curious about their lives after the genocide? So I think it poses a significant philosophical as well as a human question to all of us dealing with the question of genocide. And lastly, I think there's the very central point about our shared patriarchal, patrilineal notions of self. We assume that most of the people who were Islamized were women and children, and I think probably in numbers that's true. Most of the adult men were killed right away. Very few families were able to survive as the Dildilian family, as the whole family being able to convert. So, but nevertheless, there are other examples that we have also come across in different parts of Anatolia of men who have survived on their own, young men who have married into Muslim households, grown up and then married with other Muslims, as well as families or neighborhoods, in fact villages that have Islamized and continue to live in Turkey. And in terms of their grandchildren, they identify themselves in all kinds of ways. Turks, Kurds, Arabs, Circassians, Alevi, a-religious, atheists, having multiple identities. So there's a great diversity in terms of how they identify. But there are very few grandfather stories. Most of the books that have come out are grandmother stories. In our book, there are only 3 out of 25 stories have grandfather stories. So it seems as if it's more difficult to talk about grandfathers. And the reason might be that when you have an Armenian grandfather, because of our shared patrilineal understanding of kinship, having an Armenian grandfather would make you more of an Armenian than having an Armenian grandmother. So that might be part of the difficulty, perhaps. But there's also a shared patriarchal understanding to the nation and ourselves in all scholarship and among journalists as well. Women and children who were Islamized are often treated in books or journalistic writing in the same sentence as property. So it's possible to read such sentences as, you know, the property of Armenians were taken away, so were their women and children. So the nation, Armenian nation, is assumed to be a male nation that had property, women, and children. So women and children become part of the property owned by the man of the nation. Hence the uncuriosity over their lives, because they were property that changed hands. The Armenian nation was eradicated. So I think all of these questions, we need to be asking questions about the silence when it comes to the case of Islamized Armenians, not only in Turkey, but also in the international scholarship and general literature as well.
Regarding that silence, it seems that you have done very serious work, given the very short period of time that you've had in Turkey to address the whole sudden somehow acceptance of at least partially the notion of this genocide or this history, whatever, if it's you call it massacres, whatever way you look at it, but this 1915, 1918 reality that you have inherited from the last days of the Ottoman Empire. And then now you have to address the fact that as somehow you have to deal with this, you are realizing that in this country there are also all these possible Armenians of different personal, individual, collective, communal histories from a religious perspective, from a language perspective. This is a lot, so I'm very impressed that you are raising already all the 3 different questions that you were raising about why there is a silence. But if I may add to that observation of yours from my perspective, is that I was brought up as the lucky descendant of those orphans and refugees who made it beyond the borders of their homeland. And for the longest time, until probably about maybe 10 years ago, what we knew was that 1.5 million were killed, and whoever survived was whoever survived in Syria, Lebanon, Europe, South America, North America, wherever around the diaspora, as you recognize it as a collective experience. And then we knew, of course, that in Istanbul we had about 50,000 Armenians who existed in their identity as Armenians, practicing their religion and trying to practice their language. I found out about Hamshen Armenians exactly 5 years ago, and it was a very unexpected experience for me. It was a completely unimagined piece of information that, and I consider myself an Armenian who has gone into the history of my family, my ancestors. I have been educated in an environment where I had access to material. I didn't know that there were Hamshen Armenians. Hrant Dink was starting to talk maybe about 8 years ago about that. Even Hrant Dink was not talking about who had carried so much serious work exploration about these various communities. So the silence that we have is the silence of a completely novel reality that we have to now understand as Armenians around the world, that not only we have lost the lives, we have lost the practice of the culture, we have lost our possibility to continue creating culture and arts and continue making this language that belongs to our identity that is being threatened as we speak right now in Turkey. We realize that we also have lost lives as, not because they're dead, but lives because they don't have the right to their lives any longer. Unless, as you called earlier, the voluntarily, and this is the positive word I'm taking, the voluntarily Muslimization or Islamization. What does it mean, voluntarily? I mean, the decision to make a volunteer conversion for a culture that is quite comfortable for, you know, over 1,000, for 1,600 years to be Christian, to make a voluntarily shift, it means that there is an incredible reason there to make that shift, which is not an obvious one when it is specifically your identity. So all this is also new to the diaspora, who still is confronted every day, as we speak, with the very public policy of denial of that history. And now we have to start understanding that actually we do have survivors, and these survivors are Armenian. They are now saying that they are, and they identify themselves, but they're Muslim, they don't know the language, they don't know their names, or at best, they have two names. They have their Turkish name and they have their Armenian name. And we have now to process the fact that our memory is going to be revisited from what we see today into a reality in 2013 that belongs to us. So the silence is not the one of rejection. Let me make this very clear to all of you. If you do happen to be from that ancestry, please do know, in the diaspora, we do not reject you. We cannot reject you. You are part of our history. You are part of our forgotten memory. And for all the other people who are not necessarily of Armenian background, or they don't have this levels of Armenian identity, but you are here today as Turks because you want to know about your history, do know that we do not reject luckily, whatever still remains of lives and young generations of our history in this land. But like you, we don't know we don't know the ways to say, let's look into this. It is only kind of 10 or 12 years that Armenians can come to this country freely and speak and you know, about their identity. So I am here today and I can say to you that I am in the land of my ancestors. Does this mean anything to you? Can you understand that I'm saying this 100 years almost later, that I feel that I'm back to the land of my ancestors, and I'm meeting the Armenians who have this incredible history that you so beautifully described. There is no silence. We just need more moments like this so that we start conversing with each other and sharing maybe starting with this exhibition where we have specific moments captured in time.
Can I just, no. So I would like to extend another invitation. I know we've pushed you by having you here twice in 9 months, but in November, the Hunting Foundation is organizing a conference on Islamized Armenians, and we have received more than 50 applications from all over the world. I think it will be an exciting forum where, in Salpi's terms, we will be able to reconnect and think about this shared history together. So please do come again.
I will. Wait. Armin, last word. I'm opening it up over there.
Oh, I was going to say that one of those 50 applications was mine, so hopefully you'll accept it. Though our okay.
We're going to open this up and invite you to enter into dialogue with the 3 guests. Tamar has the microphone. Please raise your hand. Ask the question in any language you like. Questions for Ayşegül Altinay or Arsine Khanjan or Armen Marsupyan? Եթե հարցեր ունեք, խնդրեմ. And I can't. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, come on.
These are all professors. They do fine.
I'll call on you.
Tamar, over there. Right there. Okay. Jogurcan.
Thank you. I don't have any question, but I have a suggestion. Photos are not the only means for the Armenian history in these lands. So you can organize whoever is interested, maybe Mr. Kavala, some Armenian artworks, exhibitions also. With Mr. Selçuk, I'm the co-author of the Tokat ceramic books, which was published last week. So the Tokat ceramics are mostly made by Armenian ceramists, and not even one person knew about the production of ceramics in Tokat. So you can organize such organizations. Just
Thank you. Tamar, the young lady right there in the middle. Stand up so she gets you.
Hi, yes, very interesting. A very interesting exhibit. And especially following the last one with the postcards in Adana and Antep. It was actually, and Bitlis, Mush. It's very revealing. And it surprised me, I've been in Turkey for 5 years now, and I've been studying the history and going into old documents, and I was surprised to hear that it's kind of new, hearing about the forced Islamization, because there's a book downstairs, and there's a document, Samuel's, and there's a eyewitness account of a massacre in 1895. And he talks in 1895 about people holding a shotgun to the head and forcing this. But he also talked about the influence of the mullahs and mutars creating this rage and leading these massacres. As it was same as what happened in Sivas in '93 after prayer on Friday. So it surprised me because I've read about this quite a bit. And it also surprised me to hear about no literature on this, and that Islamized Armenians aren't considered Armenians. Because does that mean that, what is Armenian? Like who are we? Generally.
No, we're not doing that today. No. We are definitely not answering that question today.
But I mean, to bring that up as you have to be Christian, or you have to speak the language, or you have to for that to be for yourself to be recognized as that group. I think that's a dangerous, slippery slope to walk on.
Thank you. I suspect we may have a comment.
You go, go ahead. No, you want to? Go
No.
I can catch up anytime.
The references you made with regard to incidents of forced Islamization prior to 1915. I'm not a historian, I am a philosopher, but in doing much of the research for this, for the book that I'm writing, I especially with regard to what happened in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, and the massacres during the Hamadian era, I do realize that there were many conversions at that time. Whole villages decided that it was better to convert for survival, and they did convert, and the memoirs make actually. I don't know if you realize that as I mentioned, there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of memoirs that describe what went on in Sivas and those regions, and they make reference to these conversions. The other question about identity, and this is also related to our particular story. This conversion on August 10th of 1915 of the Dildilian family to Islam and the taking on of Turkish identities. Clearly, it was a forced conversion, but it imposed a certain silence within my family. I did not know of this conversion until about 4 years ago, my mother was too young. She was 4 years old, but my uncles were certainly old enough to convey this, and there was no talk about it in the family. There was a silencing within the family. And obviously, that's in part because they converted, but only converted for expediency's sake. And I don't, I think it would have been foolish. Well, of course, I wouldn't be here if they hadn't converted. But that shame they must have felt is probably felt in different ways by Armenians who were put into that position. And I think also, with regard to Armenian identity, it's often because of the stereotyping that is clearly there by Armenians of Turks and of Turks of Armenians over the decades. It was always a black and white distinction. You're either an Armenian, you're a Christian, or you're Turk and you're Muslim. And depending on what side you're on, one is good and one is bad. There's no gray zone here with regard to identity. You have to be one or the other. Otherwise, you're a traitor. So I think that sort of contributes to the whole silence and difficulty in coming to terms with the mixed identity. As an assimilated American, we're a really mixed bag of people. So it becomes a lot easier as generations go on, to deal with the fact that I have some African American blood, I have some Cossack blood or whatever. But that wasn't the case for a long time with Armenians, and with Turks. The national history made it difficult to be able to come to terms with it.
There, Gahasning. Tamar, since you're there, this gentleman there, and then Baron Sarkis. Oh, I was not even close.
I don't think it's a shame.
Please hold the microphone.
Maybe it's the Armenian flexibility. So an Armenian family accepting Islam should not be a shame. If you go back into history, you will find thousands of Armenians who have had Byzantine characters. They have spoke Greek, they have been to the palace, and they've served as Byzantines. So it's not the question of forced Islamic or anything else, but it is the Armenian way of life. They have migrated all over the world. They have churches in China, in South America, and so on. So this is, it has been a way of living. Imagine that the king or what prince of Van has migrated to Sivas with his whole tribe, and then you don't lose a land. You own a land and you belong to a land as long as you get stuck in there. But if you leave your land, if you go away from your land, you don't belong to that land. It's something completely different.
Thank you.
Without getting stuck on notion of religion, Muslimization or Christianity, that is not the question. The question is, with the voluntary Islamization, what happened also is that we lost the language. What do you do about that? And that we knew all along. And now we know very clearly that as we speak, Christian Armenians in this country are losing touch with their own mother tongue, a language that they have spoken for thousands of years. So the question, I mean, the question of Muslimization or not, and if we know it or not, is not the issue. For me, it's not the question if an Armenian is Muslim or Christian. But the fact is, what is an Armenian? Armenian is a culture, it's a history, it's an identity that is based on all cultures who refer to themselves as defining with a language, with a particular religion that historically they have identified with, and they have not been forced into it or out of it. So the notion of finding out today what is an Armenian as a Muslim Armenian, or if we knew about it or not, what we know, and we continue to know, is that the language in this country has been threatened and continues to be threatened to the point where in the Armenian schools today, we are generating a generation of Armenians who are speaking less and less their mother tongue out of the sheer inability to feel that that is something that they have the right to, and that still in 2013, they have the notion that it's better not to be recognized as Armenian, and it's better for me, therefore, not to know Armenian. So I'm not even talking about church or Christianity or Islam at this point. So when we talk about identity and the forced factors that impose on us shifts, I think we have to understand that from the perspective of how and why this is coming back to be a defining point of where we are in our understanding and in our presence in any given society. So this is it.
Very nice evening, beautiful exhibition, thank you very much. When we talk about the silence of Islamized Armenians, we must first understand why Armenians themselves were silent all through these years. My father used to say, son, we are afraid of our own shadow. So one day when I was very young, in my hometown, when there was the bazaar, the weekly bazaar, a peasant woman entered our yard and said, I heard you're Armenians, is it true? And my mother said, yes. And this lady, who was about 40, knelt down on the feet of my mother, kissed those feet and said, I am also an Armenian. But this is the first time that I am able to say this. So they hugged and started weeping and crying together. It is not easy to be an Armenian in Anatolia. It is even more difficult to be a Muslimized person of Armenian origin. So the silence should be understood very well. Secondly, my question is, when we look at these and all the people in this room now, at least most of them, we call ourselves survivors. My question is it possible to survive after such an atrocity? Is surviving a physical or biological matter? After losing 2,000, close to 2,000 churches and 3,000 schools in Anatolia, Armenian churches and schools, what is it to survive for me, for instance? I feel that I have lost connection with a huge past. When I was very, very young, nobody told me about my past, but I had a sense, a probably hugely romantic sense of a great loss. Now I believe that it's not a personal loss. It is a paradise lost, more or less, seeing all these pictures and reading about the time, those times, which was not a paradise, of course. But of course, it is our main arteries cut off as a nation, as a people, as a country. It's not the loss of Armenians only, it's the loss of the whole world, starting from Turkey. So the question is it possible to survive? Thank you.
Lately, I've been saying it's not paradise that's lost, but it is childhoods that were lost. My grandmother's, my mother's, my sister's, mine. That, for me at least, that is what I'm looking for as an answer to your question. What is survival, Mr. Philosopher and Madam Anthropologist?
Yes, well, that's a difficult question, but I think it relates to some things that Arsene had said. Because besides being a philosopher, I bring my philosophy to the study of genocide, and I do that not just with what happened to the Armenians, but I study the Holocaust, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, many. Yeah, I'm not at a loss for subject matter to study. And one of the things that I've learned in studying genocide and the concept of genocide, which some of you might know, was an idea that was developed by Raphael Lemkin in the 1930s. He coined the term in 1943. He had proposed two laws early on in the 1930s, even before he came up with the word of genocide. One was the law of against extermination, which is the physical, biological destruction of groups. And the other law was the law of vandalism, which was the destruction of the culture, which you're describing with the 2,000 churches and the 3,000 schools. That term of that's been now incorporated into the study of genocide is called cultural genocide. You could survive physically, but the genocide can be successful if your culture is erased. And that is what happened to the Islamicized Armenians here. And it was what was attempted, at least I believe, from what I understand and what I've studied, what was attempted on the Kurds of this country. If you can't physically destroy them, you will erase their identity, their culture, and you will get to the same outcome. So in both cases, at least in terms of the scholarship, it's believed that both are just as effective forms of genocide. Now, your question is, in the case of the Armenians, has it been successful? Are there no survivors? And this is, as I said, it's a difficult question, but I think as long as there are individuals there and organizations and societies that are trying to not only preserve what's left of the past, but give opportunities for creation of new culture based on these foundations of the past, You know, in the United States, one of the problems we have in terms of the Armenian diaspora is that the genocide and the recognition of the genocide sucks all the air out of the environment, and a lot of very creative Armenian Americans who want to do things can't find the resources to do it. They can't find the resources to write art. They can't or they have to find a genocide angle in order to get some money to do what they want to do, and that shouldn't be the case. But it's in a way we need to, once this whole question of the recognition of the genocide is behind us, hopefully that will change. But I don't think for Armenians we should wait on that. Because if we wait on that, it will be the case that the genocide will have succeeded because there won't be any culture. You know, we might get a recognition 50 years from now, but we won't know what it means to be an Armenian 50 years from now, because we haven't done the other work that's necessary. I don't think I answered the question.
Of course, the recent history of anthropology has been a history of questioning of the concept of culture. Anthropologists came to realize that they had been complicit in the colonial and nationalist projects throughout the world by assuming cultures to be coherent and homogeneous and unchanging and so on and so forth. So within anthropology, we've been questioning the whole concept of culture. And what makes this kind of questioning, this sort of curiosity into culture as a dynamic concept, as a process, as a way of becoming, and not as a fixed kind of existence, what makes very difficult to approach Armenian history and Armenian culture through this lens is precisely the experience of genocide, because a group of people were assumed to have a single identity, regardless of their vast differences and the great diversity of their experiences in different localities across a huge region. They were assumed to have a single identity, they were assumed to be a single threat, and were eradicated as such. But I think what we see happening in recent years as we're moving beyond the politics of genocide recognition or the politics of genocide denial that was the only framework in which anything came out of Turkey until very recently, which really, I think, blocked the kind of reconnections that we're exploring today. So as we're moving beyond these deadlocks, I think we see very exciting possibilities of coming together and rethinking these questions of culture and genocide and survival. One of these new sites where I see this happening is a website called Hushamadyan, which is a fascinating website that is trying to recreate in all its diversity and sophistication and richness Armenian life before 1915, and in all the ways in which it was shared in different languages, in different ways, through children's plays and recipes and so on, with the people around them. And one of the creators of this website, Vahet Ashtian, has also written very inspiring pieces on the question of shame that Armen addressed earlier. He has a very inspiring article, for instance, that talks about how women who were raped, who experienced sexual violence and torture, or who became wives and gave birth to children in Muslim families, if they were able to rejoin the Armenian community in Syria, Lebanon, or elsewhere, those women were usually seen as polluted women, and it was very difficult for them to be reintegrated into the Armenian community precisely through this concept of shame. And Vahet Ashtian challenges us to treat these women as survivors, as resistors, and as historical actors who were subjects of genocide and resisted being genocided, being killed, and survived, and urges us to take their stories seriously as well. And this gray zone that Armen was talking about, that Islamized Armenians open up for us, I think is provides an important space for all of us to question our notions of culture and identity and so on. As this gentleman was suggesting, all cultures have been dynamic, and people have adopted and changed. Some of these changes have been violent. In this case, it was a genocidal act that destroyed large numbers of people and life, a particular life throughout Anatolia, creating great loss. But it has also created, we should also look into the new ways in which people have made life, have created life, and I think Armen's photographs beyond 1915 also point us in that direction. The stories of grandchildren of Islamized Armenian survivors certainly do that as well. What happens when we listen to their stories and start to critically reconnect to those stories and to reconnect to ourselves? One of the grandchildren, whose nickname is Elif in our book, Torunlar, for instance, she says, I'm a little Armenian, a little Turkish, a little Kurdish, a little Zaza, a little Alevi, a little Sunni. I feel very enriched by having all of these identities, and also, she, of course, has the burden of a history of violence that she has inherited as part of her memory. Salpi's question, I think, is a very central and very difficult question of these lost children. Marianne Hirsch, who writes about memory and post-memory, alerts us by looking into this concept of post-memory, talks about how children of survivors have very few memories of their own childhoods, but they can speak volumes about the childhoods of their parents or grandparents. I don't think there's an answer to your questions, but the starting point is to talk about these post-memories and what they mean for us, what the kinds of traces that they have, these stories, family stories, have left with us, and how we can reconnect to those stories and to each other and to our localities in new ways.
That's actually a perfect concluding line. So unless someone under 30 has a question, we're saying thank you and going home. We're saying thank you and going. Hedo yerevi hame. Thank you. Thank you to. Thank you to you. Thank you to Armen Marsubian, the Dildilian, Derharuchunian, all the other last names, families. Thank you for all that you've done. To Ayşegül Altunay and to Arsine Khanjan, because she came the farthest. To Anadolu Kültür and Osman Kavala, because otherwise we wouldn't be here.